Welcome to the Writer's Journey podcast. I'm Michael Laron, a science fiction and fantasy author on a journey to go from nobody to bestseller, and I'm documenting every step of the way. Tune in every week as I pull back the curtain on my writing life and how I'm building a writing career while working a full-time job, raising a family, and attending law school classes in the evenings. You can find show notes for this week's episode, a free starter library of my fiction, and much more at michaellaron.com. Hello and welcome to episode 83. 83 is a good number. I'm feeling good today, and so actually I have a lot of things to talk about. I think it kind of makes up for the last 2 weeks where I didn't really have as much to say. So, quick update on how things are going with me. Law school is going good. In fact, it's on what I would call autopilot. I've got the book read. I've got about half the material diagrammed. I've been using nice software to help me mind map things. I know about the first third of the cases in the class cold, meaning I definitely know them. I know the laws behind them. So law school is going really good. I even got some feedback from my professor. She said I was doing a great job, asking me how I like the course. And so I'm feeling pretty good about where I'm at with school. Personal life, things are going good. I've got some work travel coming up, which work travel always kind of uproots things. So I'm just thinking about how I'm going to do some things around that. Do I use some of the layovers that I'm going to have to get some work done or get some writing done? So I'm still thinking through that, but I usually travel a couple times a year, and this is going to be one of those times. So it's going to be an interesting to see how I keep up with things. And then with Author Level Up, I'm still trying to figure out what content I'm going to do through the end of the year. So I'm in no real danger. My videos are booked through November 1st, so I've got through the end of the month to figure that out. So I'm not terribly worried about that. So from an update perspective, things are going well, and I'm really looking forward to October this year. Last year's October was horrible, but this year's October is off to a pretty good start so far. Knock on wood. And I'm actually knocking on wood to make sure that stays the case. So I wanted to let you all know that I have a sister podcast. It's called Writing Tip of the Day. So many of you have probably heard it. I announced it a couple weeks ago. And on that podcast, I talk about writing tips. And I give you one tip of the day. So it's not like a 20, 30-minute podcast. It's one tip of the day, and it's 2 to 3 minutes per day, Monday through Friday. And this week, through the end of November, I'm going to be talking about NaNoWriMo. So if any of you happen to write, and if any of you are wanting to participate in NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month for short, then be sure to check out my podcast at authorlevelup.com/writing tip of the day. Starting this week, I'll be talking about some tips to get you prepared for NaNoWriMo, because November 1st will be here before you know it. And then starting November 1st through November 30th, and I think maybe bleeding into the first week of December, I will be talking about writing tips that are geared toward people who are participating in NaNoWriMo. And even if you're not participating in it, if you're writing a novel or trying to figure out how to write your first novel, if you're an aspiring writer, you definitely want to check that out. So check it out at authorlevelup.com/writing tip of the day. You can listen to it on your Amazon Echo device as a flash briefing. So that's pretty cool. And then you can also listen to it on all of your podcast networks of choice. And speaking of podcasts, because I love podcasts, I did my first interview in a long time. So I did a podcast interview with my buddy Dale Roberts. He runs a YouTube channel called Self-Publishing with Dale. And in many ways, it's a sister channel to Author Level Up. We talk about many of the same things. Dale and I are passionate about many of the same things, and we chat on a regular basis. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was a collaboration. He wanted to get me over on his channel, and I'm going to be doing the same thing here in the future. And so one of the things that he was very interested in was the Alliance of Independent Authors, so ALLI for short. And I talk all the time about ALLI on this podcast and all the things that I do and how much I really believe in that vision. It's a nonprofit organization for writers, provides advocacy services, provides content, free information to help writers take charge of their careers, be the creative directors of their careers, and not get scammed, right? I mean, that is the type of nonprofit organization that we need in this industry. And so I've served on the ALLI team for a number of years. And so Dale was wanted to know about that and wanted his audience to know about that. And so I went on his show and we talked about the basics of ALLI, how ALLI was founded, talked about the Watchdog service. We talked about the different member benefits of being part of Ally. So if you are a writer listening to this and your ears are perking up, nonprofit organization for writers, right? Then be sure to check it out. I will link to it in the show notes. But I always enjoy talking with Dale. He's always a really good time when we're on podcast interviews and things like that. So be sure to check Dale out and be sure to subscribe to his channel if you are a writer. So I also wanted to talk about another thing that I did. It seems like when things come, they just come in batches. So I did a webinar with the good people over at BookBrush. BookBrush is a design service. It's kind of like Canva, but it's for writers, and it allows you to create marketing materials for your book. So, for example, if you have a Facebook ad, it allows you to very easily put that together, and it offers a number of different tools, and it just makes it really, really easy so that you don't have to use Photoshop, or you don't have to kind of muddle your way through figuring out how to add certain things to your image. And so I partnered with BookBrush, and I did a webinar. And essentially it was about 30, 40 minutes or so. And it was about the basics of using your book cover as a nice background for your image. So sometimes you don't really need to go off and go to your stock photo sites and buy royalty-free images to look good in a Facebook ad or anything like that. Sometimes the best real estate that you have is right in front of you. So I did a quick webinar on how to use your own book cover as the basis of marketing material. So what I'll do is I will link to I'll link to BookBrush, and then I'll also link to their Facebook group. You don't have to be a BookBrush member to join. There's lots of interesting things in there. And BookBrush also has a free plan, which is pretty cool, and you can get in and play with it and see if it works for you. But yeah, that was a webinar that I did with them, so I'll link to that in the show notes as well. So technology, that's what I wanted to talk about next. So I have a lot of topics. So I tried to chain these together in a way that made sense. But technology, so it's October, and every October is when I start thinking about the immediate plans for the new year. So I start thinking about what are some of my plans. I start thinking about strategy, and do I need to sit down and rethink some of my strategy and course correct a little bit. And I haven't really gotten to the strategy piece yet. The one big thing that's been kind of staring me in the face for about the last 4 or 5 months or so is technology. So I have a MacBook Pro, or not MacBook Pro, I have a MacBook Air. I bought it in 2014. And it was great when I bought it. I had no issues, but it's gotten older, and it's to the point where I've got the memory, pushed to its limit. I've got the hard drive pushed to its limit. I just need something faster, and I need something that's going to be a little bit more up to date. And so I started doing some research on laptops and just figuring out what's out there, because I'm an Apple guy. I wouldn't say that I'm an Apple fanboy. Apple has their problems, but I'm definitely an Apple fan. And because I use Ulysses and Scrivener to write my books, and because there's another number of apps that I use to run my writing business that are Mac only, I'm married to Apple for the near future. And so I was on the Apple website, and I was looking at the current offerings. So there's the MacBook Air, there's the MacBook Pro, and that's it for their laptops, right? They've streamlined their laptop offerings over the last few years. And so I was kind of looking at it, and I was like, this MacBook that they're selling now in 2019, yeah, it looks identical. I mean, all Apple products, they don't change their designs very often. But I was like, the specs look the same too. Like, the processor feels like the processor that I bought 4 or 5 years ago. The memory is the exact same memory offerings that I had when I bought this computer. Like, it's 120, like their base offering, I think, is like 128 gigabytes for a solid state drive, which is nothing. And when I bought that 5 years ago, I was able to make that work, because I would store my videos and store my music and stuff on an external hard drive, so it was never a huge issue. But now that I'm running Adobe products, and now that I've got different needs, that's nothing. I mean, that I can take up 128 gigabytes in the drop of a hat, and so I'm like, okay, they still don't have a 1 terabyte solid state drive offering on the MacBook Airs. And so I'm thinking to myself, this is garbage. Like, I don't like any of these laptop offerings. And so then I was looking at the MacBook Pro, and I was like, I'm going to pay $700-800 more for a computer that's not really that much more powerful. And so I'm like, okay, I don't like any of these options. And I'm thinking, I'm not going to go back to Windows. That's not an option. And so I was doing some research, and I found some video reviews on the iPad Pro, which I wouldn't say that I'm an iPad fan. I mean, I like iPads, but up until now, to me, they've always just been glorified iPhones. I mean, you can do everything you can do on your phone, just with a bigger screen. And so I was looking at the iPad Pro in combination with the Apple Pencil, and I actually was pretty impressed with the new iPad OS. And I thought, okay, maybe I could kind of do some things on an iPad. And I thought, well, maybe I could buy an iPad in addition to a laptop to help me do some more things on the go, right? And so that just didn't quite work out. The iPad's still not quite where I want it. I think in 3 to 4 years, I think that'll be a different conversation. And so then I was kind of looking at, well, what do I actually need a laptop for versus what do I actually do on my phone? And so I sat down and I kind of mapped out all the essential activities that I do. And there's really only 4, maybe 3 activities that I do that I need a desktop for, or a laptop, or some sort of physical computer presence. That's formatting my books. So ebook formatting, paperbook formatting, doing my videos, because you can edit on the go, but it's not quite there yet. It will be in a few years though. And then doing my podcasts. I can't quite do those on the go. And then there was like one other thing. I don't remember what it is or what it was. But so I started thinking about that, and I was like, oh, maybe an iPad could work. But then no, it's not going to work. And so I was like, well, I really don't like the laptop offering. So I was like, well, what about the Mac Mini? And I'm going to pay the exact same amount for a Mac Mini. I was like, well, why would I pay all that money when I could just buy an iMac? And so I was looking at the iMacs, and I was like, the iMac offerings are kind of stale too. I mean, if you look at the reviews and you look at the benchmarks, and it's not really that good of a value either, but it's a better value than the MacBook Air. So I'm probably going to go with an iMac, to be honest with you. And I'm going to have to probably sacrifice some portability, but I kind of thought back to it. I haven't really taken my laptop anywhere more than 2 or 3 times in the last year or so. Most of the stuff I can do is on my phone. So I'll probably get an iMac, and then at some point in the next couple of years, I'll probably switch or get an iPad Pro and introduce that into my workflow so that I can do some things on the go. So anyway, I was also looking at some technology on e-readers, because I really want to revamp my reading habits. So I've been doing a lot of reading for law school, and I'll talk about that here in a few minutes, but I've been doing a lot of reading for law school, and I really want to get back to reading like regular books, not law books. And so I wanted to find something that would help me be a little bit more active when I'm reading, right? And so you can't really be active on your phone when you're reading. It's a little bit difficult. And I do like the pen to paper feel when I'm reading. I do like to be able to annotate on the book and be able to make notes and be able to do mind maps and things like that. But you really can't do that with paper books. I mean, you can, but my issue is I want to be able to access my notes at any time. So if I have a paperback book and I'm annotating at one, I'm not going to be able to take paperbacks with me just due to my lifestyle. So that's not really an option. But then 2, if I do make notes in a book, I want to be able to access those later, right? And I want to be able to contextualize them and look at them in relation to other notes that I've taken, because that's how I come up with a lot of my ideas. And so I was looking at e-readers and just kind of how far they've come, and Kindle doesn't offer anything like that. I was looking at the Remarkable. If you've ever heard of that, it's a e-reader, but it's like it's supposed to be like a paper experience. So it comes with a stylus, and you can write on it, and it allows you to mark up ebooks. It allows you to mark up PDFs, and so on and so forth. There were a few issues with that though that didn't make it applicable for what I was doing. And I think Onyx has some pretty good e-reading products. I was actually pretty impressed with, I think it was their Pro Forma, or it was their Nova Pro, the Onyx Books Nova Pro. It's like one of the worst product names ever. But the book or the e-reader, the hardware itself was actually pretty cool. I was really impressed with it. It allows you to do a lot of really cool things from an annotation perspective. You can use a stylus on it, and as you're reading, you can mark up things. And I think you can even access the Kindle store on it, but there were still a few things that it didn't quite work. And so I think I'm probably just going to go with the Kindle Fire. It's not ideal, but at least I can listen to my audiobooks on it. At least I can read on it. And yeah, anyway, maybe I'll talk about that more in the future. But those are the big technology things that I've been thinking about, because I really want to be able to hit the ground running on January 1st with new technology, because I'm going to need it for new things, right? So I'm going to be recording my audiobooks moving forward, and so I'm going to need a better computer that can handle that. I'm going to be editing more videos, so I'm going to need more processing power. There's other things that I plan to be doing in terms of consulting with software and development and things like that, and so I need a computer that can keep up with me, as well as something that I can take advantage of with the most up-to-date versions of the Mac software and things like that. So that was a big thing that I was doing this weekend, looking at technology and capabilities and kind of forecasting what my needs are going to be, not like now, but in the next 3 to 4 years. So that's always exciting. It's something I do about once a year. And so that took up a good part of my weekend. And so I wanted to talk next about writing. So I've been talking about technology, but I'm starting to get ready to get back into writing again. I'm really feeling it. Story ideas are starting to come to me on a regular basis, whereas they didn't about 2 or 3 weeks ago because I was so busy with school, and I'm just getting that hankering, right? So one of the things that I always do to start preparing for writing is I do a lot of reading. So I've been doing a lot of reading. I've been reading some nonfiction, and I'm going to start reading some novels here, and I find that I read voraciously when I'm about ready to start writing again. It's to the point where I could devour a book a day in some cases. And so I've been doing a lot of reading. I've been testing out a new technique for reading. So I was talking about law school, and over the last couple of weeks, I've been talking about how I've been doing a lot of reading, how I've been doing a lot of cases. And so it's kind of interesting, right? So like law school, you have to read, but you have to read in a different way. It's a very active type of reading because it's almost like you're having a dialogue with the text that you're reading. And so I thought, okay, so I've been reading these cases, and I was able to get through a 700-page book, which has got about 90 cases in about a month. And I've been able to retain about 80-85% of what's in the book, right? That's pretty remarkable. Why can't I do that with my nonfiction? And with the fiction that I read? And so I've been taking a look at the way that I read things other than law books. And so I thought, okay, what are some of the things that I did intuitively when I was reading these law books that I am not doing today when I'm reading nonfiction? And so I thought nonfiction would be a good test to play around with this. And so I thought, okay, what are the essential elements that I want to lift from any nonfiction book I read? What are the things that I want to retain, first off? Because you can't retain an entire book. That doesn't make any sense. But what are the strategic things that I want to retain when I'm reading a book of nonfiction, whether that be self-help, whether that be a cookbook, whether that be a biography, whatever it is I'm reading? What do I want to retain? And so I came up with 4 things that very, very closely mirror the IRAC method. And I talked about the IRAC method, I think about 2 or 3 weeks ago when I was talking about, I think it was the episode that was titled A New Way to Think About the Craft. And IRAC stands for issues, rules, or relevant law, analysis, and then conclusion. And it's how you would look at a law school case, right? It's how you contextualize it and how you would glean things from it. And so I thought, okay, the 4 things that I would want to know from any nonfiction book that I read are issues that are raised by the author, right? So if the author raises certain issues, those are important to understand, right? The second thing you would want to know is arguments and opinions around those issues, right? And then the third thing you would want to know are anecdotes or stories. So if there's a story that the author tells about a certain person, or if there's a certain example that the author might give, those I find are helpful to they're easy to remember, but they're also helpful when I'm sharing a book that I've read with you all, with you all listening. It just makes it easier to share. And then lastly, which is probably the most important thing, is facts and data, right? So I think I mapped it out. It's kind of silly. It spells, I think it was IRAF, not Iraq, but IRAF. So issues, arguments is the R, get it? Opinions, or issues, arguments, anecdotes, and facts. So I kind of had to finagle my way into it. And so what I started doing was I started reading a new book, and then I started highlighting based on color. So I color coded each thing. So issues are one color, arguments were another color, stories were another color, and facts were another color. And then I would just take notes on those. And so far it went pretty well. I was able to get through the book pretty quickly. I got through it in like a day. And I think the technique worked pretty well. I'm still trying to figure out some things on it. So then what I did was Kindle allows you to look at all your notes on one page. If you go to your desktop or your laptop computer, you can look at all your notes on one page. So what I did was I copied all those notes and I moved them into Ulysses. And then what I did was I did a find replace, because what it does is it'll say blue highlight, blah, 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 orange highlight, blah, 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 pink highlight, blah, blah, blah. I replaced those highlights with the name of the issues or arguments. And then it had the text of my note there. So pretty much all the notes that I took for that book, I could import them wholesale into Ulysses, which I could do other things with it, right? And so that was really interesting. And so I thought, okay, this is working really, really well. I can tweak it just a little bit more. But now I'm at the point where I can more actively read nonfiction to where I can get more out of it. And if I can get more out of it, then I can share more of it with the people on my podcast, people on social media, my YouTube channel. It's just going to have benefits in all areas of my life, right? Or the writing life. And so now I'm thinking about how can I do this with fiction. Haven't figured that out yet. It's going to be totally different, right? Fiction is totally different. With nonfiction, I want to be more active when I'm reading. With fiction, you definitely have to be more passive, right? You got to enjoy the story. You've got to be able to get out of the way and just soak in the story. But then it's after you finish reading fiction, how do you go back and look at it in a way that you can take things away and immediately apply them to your own writing? So those are some of the things that I've been thinking about, right? So that's the next topic. I have another topic. I told you I had a lot of things to talk about. I'm brimming with topics this week. So I was talking about books that I've read. So I read a book. It was called The Book Business. It was by Mike Shatskin. He had a co-author with it as well, and it was everything you need to know about the book business. And basically what the authors talk about in this book are how the publishing industry works, and not just self-publishing on Amazon, but how publishing in general works. In the self-publishing industry, it can sometimes be an echo chamber. And I think that we often forget that we're just one sliver of one piece of a very, very large industry, right? And so traditional publishing is a totally different world, right? They have other people that they work with. They work with distributors. They work with wholesalers. They work with booksellers. And many of those customs are foreign to independent authors. And so I always am looking for ways to understand the publishing industry at large at a deeper level. So when I was writing my book, The Indie Writer's Encyclopedia, one of the things that I really wanted to do was understand the industry as a whole from a big picture perspective so that I could explain that to an indie writer, right? And so I've taken a vested interest in learning more about that. And so I really enjoyed this book. It was a great window into the past and the publishing side of the industry. There were a few things that it really hit home that I think it's easy to forget, right? And that it's that publishers are very, very large corporations. They're so large, in fact, that it's easy to forget their magnitude. So if you want to traditionally publish a book, I think that one of the statistics in the book was that Penguin Random House is the largest publisher out of the big five, and they employ somewhere around 12,500 people. So your manuscript goes to an organization of 12,500 people, okay? And they all work in different departments. Your manuscript may be traded back and forth between multiple departments, right? And so your manuscript really is a commodity to that organization. That's not necessarily a bad thing, depending on what your goals and your preferences are, but you're dealing with a very large corporation with a very large amount of people. And in any corporation, what you have to remember, and they don't talk about this in the book, it just sparks some thoughts, is that there are different departments, and there are always politics, right? There's always bureaucracy, and sometimes the customer gets forgotten in all of that politicking and all of that bureaucracy and all the guidelines and rules and things like that. And so I think you have to remember that if you are one of those writers out there that says, I want to be a traditionally published writer. If leadership changes in a certain department, or if a company changes direction, your manuscript could I shouldn't say could, it will be very quickly forgotten and lost in the stream of the changes. And corporations are always in flux, especially when they're losing money. They're always changing and shifting and reorganizing. And then in the publishing industry, with the big five, used to be the big six, but they're swallowing each other up. And so you've got to think about that on what happens with your book or the contract that you've signed when the publisher that you signed it with gets acquired by another company. Right? Now, again, they didn't talk about this in the book, but it's just things that I was thinking about. And so one of the other things that the book talks about, it has a final chapter. I think it was called the future of the publishing industry. And so they talk about some of the emerging technology and what some of their predictions for the future are. And it got me thinking, there's lots of emerging technology out there that's going to completely change the way that we do business as writers, but not only as writers, but as entertainers, right? And the publishing industry it's going to be at a completely different place about 15, 20 years from now. Okay. And so I've always thought in the back of my head, and I think reading this book validated it for me. And I talked a little bit about this last week, that if publishers adopt emerging technology and they figure out how to disrupt themselves, they could potentially disrupt self-published writers, right? And they could take back their market share. They could do that if they wanted to do it. If they adopted AI, if they adopted some of the new voice technology that's coming out, if they started new business models such as buying up rights cheaply from authors that want to perpetuate their rights when they die, things like that, things I've talked about on this podcast, right? I think that they have the potential to take back their market share. And I can see a future not that far from now where self-publishing is kind of looked down upon again, right? Because publishers, they kind of get their second wind. I know that's a very unpopular thing to say, right? Oh, well, self-publishing is not going anywhere. And I don't think it is. Trust me, it's not going anywhere. But it's cool today, right? It's cool. 15, 20 years ago, self-publishing was not cool, okay? 15 to 20 years from now, it's very possible that self-publishing could not be cool again, right? You're a self-published writer, okay, that's not cool, right? I don't know. It's kind of like with Gary Vaynerchuk. He's an entrepreneur that I follow. He always talks about entrepreneurship. And he talks about how entrepreneurship is really, really cool now. But when the economy goes south, no one's going to want to be known as an entrepreneur, right? The 9-to-5 is going to be back. So they got to think about that. Things change. The culture shifts. And so I think we as writers have to be thinking about how the culture and the landscape might shift. Yes, things are very favorable for us today. Amazon seems like it's in our corner for now. There are lots of different opportunities in the self-publishing industry. But what if the economy goes south, right? And it's going to at some point. It's going to happen. So when the economy does go south, there are a lot of companies that provide services to writers and who there are a lot of editors and cover designers who service writers who may not be able to survive, right? So then what happens to the industry? What happens to all these different services that we use as writers? What happens to reading habits? One of the really interesting things that he mentioned in this book that Chatskin mentioned was that audiobooks have been booming, right? They've just been super successful. I think, double-digit growth or every year for a long time, right? And one of the things he talked about was that they were looking at point-of-sale data, so sales data for audiobooks, and the only year it didn't grow as an industry, the only year the audiobooks didn't grow as an industry was in 2008 when the financial crisis happened. Now, that was an interesting takeaway. In the reason it didn't grow was because people were spending less time in their car, right? Because gas prices went up. A lot of people lost their jobs, and so they were spending less time in the car, right? And that's when people listen to audiobooks. So that's interesting. If the market goes south, what's going to happen to this audiobook growth? And what's going to happen to ebooks and paperbacks? Will the sales of ebooks and paperbacks go up? I don't know. I thought that's interesting. Those are the sorts of questions that I'm always interested in, right? And so this was an interesting book. Shatskin definitely knows his stuff. He's definitely very pro publishing. I think he's come around in the last few years to that. But I'll put a link to the book in the show notes. It's called The Book Business: Everything You Need to Know. I highly recommend that you read it. You may not agree with everything in it. I certainly didn't, but I think it definitely gives really good context, good historical context to why the book business is the way it is. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to talk about today, it's just the last thing, right? I attended an online webinar, and it was around voice and Amazon Alexa flash briefings. So you all know that I have a flash briefing. It's writing tip of the day. I mentioned it at the very beginning of this podcast, and it is still very new technology. In fact, it is so new that Amazon doesn't really know how to promote it. And there are really only a few people in this space that are really making waves. And so I thought this would be a great opportunity for me to adopt some new technology and kind of put my money where my mouth is and try to pioneer some things, right? And so I've been doing this writing tip of the day. It's been going really well. And so there was a online summit that had a bunch of different speakers and a bunch of different takeaways. And so I said, okay, I'll register for it. I'll sign up for it. It's virtual, and it was run by Bradley Metrock. He's a pretty cool thought leader in the publishing space around voice, and there were some pretty cool takeaways from it. I'll probably share those at a later date because I think I'm running a little long on this episode. But I definitely picked up some tips and techniques on how to market my flash briefing a little bit better, and some things that I can do in the future to improve my presence in the voice space. So a lot of things this week, right? Was doing a lot of things. It seems like it comes in waves, and Octobers are usually really, really busy for me, but there's usually a lot to talk about. So I'm going to leave it there for this week. I hope that you enjoyed this longer episode of The Writer's Journey. Certainly let me know what your thoughts are. I hope that you're having a fantastic week. And I don't ask for this very often, but would you mind leaving a review of the show? Reviews help me find other people when they're on a podcast page, determining whether they need to listen to something, whether they want to listen to something or not. Reviews often are the tipping point. So if you wouldn't mind just a 1-sentence or 2-sentence review talking about what you like, an honest review, of course, I would greatly appreciate that if you've enjoyed listening to these shows. So with that, I hope that you have a fantastic week, and I will holler at you next time. Thanks for joining me this week. If you enjoyed this episode, you'll enjoy my backlist episodes at michaelaran.com/podcast. For your free starter library of my favorite novels, join my fan club by visiting michaelaran.com/fanclub. If you're a writer and want to connect with me further, check out my YouTube channel, Author Level Up, for helpful writing advice at authorlevelup.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week.